The Trump administration is proposing to take the U.S. armed forces to infinity and beyond. Vice President Mike Pence unveiled the administration's plan to create a sixth branch of the U.S. military by 2020, known as a Space Force. The administration is asking Congress for $8 billion. I remind you, there's not clean water yet in Flint, Michigan. $8 billion over the next 5 years to protect the United States from emerging threats, while also combating space age advancements by China and Russia. They hope to have it up and running by 2020.
Too often, previous administrations all but neglected the growing security threats emerging in space. President Trump stated clearly and forcefully that space is, in his words, a war-fighting domain just like land and air and sea. And just as we've done in ages past, the United States of America, under his leadership, will meet the emerging threats on this new battlefield.
I know it seems like it was sort of absurd, but he was just glad that nobody was asking him about Paul Manafort. I want to bring in Dr. Mae Jemison, honored to have her here, a former NASA astronaut and the first African-American female to go into space in 1992, a hero of mine, and Matt Welsh, not a hero of mine, but a friend. Mae, what do you think of this proposal?
I'm actually disappointed because we're actually taking something that has an opportunity to really unite humanity that we can work around in space exploration and really using it divisively. It's really clear that if there are issues that are associated with reorganization, then that makes sense. The United States has formidable capabilities in space. Yes, we need to keep them up. There's already a level of militarization, but the need to create a separate military branch, the Pentagon requiring another $8 billion to do that, is really disappointing. It's worrisome because of the rhetoric, not the issue around reorganization to be more robust, to do other things.
There is a real threat. China and Russia, they are testing anti-satellite weapons. They are moving forward. Do we need to be doing so?
Well, we've actually been able to do some of this before, and we've actually done it. And we do have formidable capabilities. Again, making sure that we have all the adequate, and not just adequate, the strong capabilities we need are absolutely a requirement. The question is whether we need another branch of the military to do it, and whether or not we need to spend an additional $8 billion to do it, when there's so many other ways we can look at this. But the reorganization, there are issues that can go on in the Pentagon and the military, different Air Force, how they use the funding. You know, it's the issues around needing another branch.
Matt, Defense Secretary Jim Mattis now says he's on board. Months ago, he criticized it. I'm following Ben Sasse on Twitter, and he's mocking it. I mean, he says athletic directors understand that all service academies can be trap games, but Space Force Academy is especially dangerous. Their intergalactic, planetary, intergalactic skills are mad good. You've got Ben Sasse trolling the president, quoting the Beastie Boys.
Yeah.
I mean, is that not humiliating? The Space Force, I mean, Mike Pence is standing up there like, this is the future. And you got Ben Sasse making fun of it. And just a couple of months ago, Mattis was like, not a good idea. Who wants this besides the president?
And Air Force Secretary Heather Wilson also has in the past previously said that this isn't we're trying to organize so many different things here. It's a bureaucratic nightmare. The best stuff that has happened in space development over the last 5-6 years has almost exclusively come from the private sector. It's when Barack Obama said, okay, let's open this up to more private competition. Let's stop having the U.S. government and NASA be a monopolist on the provision of space goods out there. So this idea of centralizing, of having a top-down kind of way of developing things, it hasn't worked in the past. It's kind of where we got stuck before. The Pentagon is not known for spending money well. We still can't get joint fighter aircraft together that we can share between the various branches. And there's no reason to believe that this is going to happen well now. I think what we're seeing here is what we've seen a lot from the Trump administration on policies that are both serious and unserious. He just has a brain fart, and then they rally around him and try to kind of create it, backfill whatever he just sort of proposed on the fly. This isn't seriously thought through, and no matter how Mike Pence gets that look in his eyes, the far-off gaze, talking about the president, he did this with great forethought. No, they're just making it up. They have Space Force.
Matt is unaware that that word is strictly forbidden on this show. May, what's your dream? What should it look like? Quickly.
Well, so one of the things, initiative that I've been working on really has been how do we use space exploration to actually get people connected around the world. We have a lot of capabilities already in terms of the military. I think what Matt just said about how do we become more robust, it's not by a top-down approach. The way to do this is, yes, sort of say inside of the military for the Pentagon, the agencies that already exist, to rearrange, to do the things that they need to do to make their capabilities more effective, more robust. And yet at the same time, we have to understand that creating more weapon systems and technology escalation in space is not going to make us safer. It's really an illusion.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.